Welcome all. We plan to make this session a very interactive one. And so we are going to call for your participation now. What we would like you to do is use the chat box. That box is over on the right-hand side, in case you haven't noticed it so far. And we would be very curious to find out what your definition is for the word purpose, how you define the word purpose, or perhaps purpose driven. That will not be the only definition that we'll be calling you from you today, but we wanted to get the ball rolling, so to speak. So please feel free to use the chat box, pass on your definition of the term purpose or purpose driven, and we will use your input as an impetus to manage our conversation today. So again, first of all, thanks again for joining. We would like you to give us your definition of the term purpose or purpose driven. Please feel free to use the chat box. Just go ahead and type in whatever definition that you think is appropriate, and we will use your impetus to steer this conversation today. And of course, I've been speaking way too much already. So Meir, I give you the stage. Perhaps if you can give our audience a bit of a description of who you are and maybe some of the things you do, and then we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling.
Thank you, Mike. It's amazing to collaborate with you, and it's really fun to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me the stage. I'm Meir. I've been working in design field for over 10 years now. Basically, I started out with service design, but then I moved towards a more holistic approach towards design. I was the designer in the beginning, but now I believe everybody can be a designer, and I'm now a holistic facilitator for people, and I'm the play wizard and founder of Design Playing. And what I mostly focus on is how people get into play, get into original thinking, find their inner inspiration, and get into applied dreaming so that they could change the world towards something that they want to live in, and not towards something that they want to avoid, they want to escape from. And I'm not focused on problems, I'm focused on dreams. And I've been helping pioneers to co-create the conscious new play together with my methodologies and the new methodology that I created called Design Playing. And when we're saying purpose, I am really curious about what people are going to say, Mike, because as you know, these kinds of events, most of the time, the people on stage seem to have power over people. But I don't believe in anybody being above anybody else. And like, I would really love this place for everyone to co-join and collaborate and bring something to the table together. So I would really love people if they can ask questions, if they can, like you said, bring in their definitions for purpose in the chat. So it would be amazing to see that.
Great. Yes. First of all, thanks, Meir, for your introduction, and perhaps maybe another call to action to all of you out there. We would like to have your definition of the term purpose or purpose driven. And what we would like to do is use your definitions as a springboard, so to speak, to steer our conversation in a certain direction. But while we are waiting for that impetus, and please feel empowered, there is no right or wrong answer, just to make sure that we're all clear on that one. I would like to start with something else that we talked about before we started today, and that was this idea of play. How did you get started in exploring this concept of play?
For me, actually, since my childhood, of course, like child, we know they play. But since my childhood, I had this understanding of playing with everything, like not just objects, but thoughts, ideas, emotions, and everything. Like, how can I make something more enjoyable? even an experience that would be boring in the case. And boredom is also important. Like we have been talking with you, Mike, and all these experiencing build up to the moment where I started doing service design. And I'm looking at people because I'm in boardrooms, I'm in workshops, and looking at people, and we're actually playing. But within that play, I see how limited thinking can get, how we're repeating the same old patterns, and how can we open this up? And the more I went into this, I realized actually maybe we need to focus more on children. So I started bringing children together with adults to design together. And there I realized actually whatever we do in life is play, because outside of the play shop, we're still continuing to play. Whatever we do, even we do recess, like, okay, let's do this task. Let's build a new world. Let's build a new service. Let's build a new system. But okay, we need to rest. We need to eat. We need to do something. And the play continues. And from there, I started to realize like, as soon as I wake up in the morning and start doing things, even when I'm arguing with people, I am playing, I'm setting rules, and I am having the time of my life now. And when I'm having that, I started to look at things like I was looking at it when I was a child. Everything is about perception, how I perceive it. So, like I said, even when I'm arguing, I am playing. There are certain rules. Like I'm going to tell you certain things, but you're not going to understand some of the words that I say. So you're going to counteract and then tell me different things. And okay, these are the rules of the game. So how can I overcome this? So for me, play, actually, the understanding of play have extended so much that I started to say life is play. And this is what I am getting people prepared to. Because after getting children and adults together in the same room, I've realized different roles. I've started to include teenagers. And when you look at a child represents the dream. Like they have the potential and the ability to dream boundlessly. Whereas a teenager have a boundless courage. They are like the courageous change makers. And the adult role is about reaching resources. And when you bring all these things together, a child's play may have little resources, but together we can reach the highest resources with the highest courage, with the highest dream. So we can change everything very rapidly. And this understanding of play, there are different levels of play, like the children's play, the teenagers play, the adults play, and the play of all. And this understanding brought me the idea of design playing, basically, how I can formulate a methodology to bring people together to achieve this. And it starts from within.
A number of interesting things that you mentioned there. One of my observations is that when you ask, say, for example, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, maybe or younger, what they can do and what they can't do, there is no distinction, because what they don't know, they try. And if it doesn't quite work, they are not discouraged. But there's a certain point in time, I would believe, at least with the first grade, perhaps even younger, I'm not quite sure, that conditioning takes place where you said, that's good, but that's not correct. So we make a differentiation between right and wrong, as if we live in this world of duality where it either falls into one category or the other. We can leave that one to the side. But we continue on this path, and by the time we reach, well, you mentioned teenagers, say for a little bit longer or a little bit older, that that desire to try something different is totally lost. And we spend the rest of our life thinking that this is the way it needs to be done. It's not to be enjoyed. And we make this equation that something that you enjoy is not where you make money or where you have your livelihood, perhaps better said. And in fact, we relegate this idea of enjoyment. If I'm going to equate play and enjoyment, we equate these elements to something that you do as a kid, but once you grow up, you're supposed to forget it. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's important to set boundaries and rules in life, as long as we have the understanding that they can be changed. Like if you do something that is not necessarily good or bad, it's not right or wrong, but it's about, is it serving me or serving the community now? And a behavior, a choice of action might not be serving us now, but when we go, let's say, like 2 years from now, and when we look at it again, we might need to change that behavior because things change and we need to update ourselves. And when you look at the child's way, because they don't have any limits, they can try everything, even things that are harmful to their health, even things that are life-threatening. But then an adult comes in, they have a certain experience or things that they have heard of, thinking that they are their experience, and they tell the child this is right or wrong. While doing this, actually the adult is drawing boundaries around the child. If these boundaries are drawn transparently, telling about like, if you do this, this might be the result, but it may not also be the result. We can try it together. So I think what children brings into the table is for adults to reevaluate their boundaries. So instead of just being the power figure and drawing certain boundaries from up down perspective, we can actually level ourselves together with children and discover together with them what can serve us now. Because even just explaining to children, what they need to eat in terms of healthy, uh, we are reevaluating what we think health is. We need to describe in such a way that is very simple, that doesn't have any jargon, any terminology, that the child can understand. And while being transparent about it, we can also really understand what we are saying. And when we are saying it, we can be flexible and realize while talking with the child, actually, I can change this. You know what? Let's try it a different way. I'm going to be more free and let you lead. So there are moments where the child can also lead. And this, I think, is a huge change in society, like listening to each other, giving the floor to each other, equal amount.
And not only do I agree, I think that one of the advantages of listening to children is that they have not been exposed to bias. In other words, we have this idea in our heads that things are supposed to work a certain way. And unfortunately, the older we get, the more pronounced these barriers become, meaning that it can only either be A or B, and we never think that it could be Y or Z. And of course, those people who don't know any better, and they don't necessarily have to be children, but primarily I see this within children, they will go ahead and try everything. And we create rules that do not exist. And I'd be keen on your opinion on this one. I've noticed this also with corporations, that people are so afraid of doing the wrong thing that if they are not given specific rules, they will make them up themselves, because the last thing that they want to do is put themselves in a situation where they might be blamed for something that they were not responsible for. So they'll go ahead and say, but that wasn't part of the agreement. That's not what we're supposed to do here. And then even within those rules that have been created, they'll create a small niche and they will say, that's what I'm responsible for. Basically keeping everybody away. And if the whole project or whatever the endeavor is goes belly up, they could say, but this part worked okay. Your thoughts on that one?
I think let's start with the idea of getting old, because it applies to people and it applies to companies as well. I think the ability to feel at ease with dealing with uncertainty is what defines getting old. The less you feel at ease with dealing with uncertainty, the older you are. So when we look at huge companies and little startups, these huge companies have left their flexibility so much that they're actually old, they're ancient. But these startups can do some things like go there, try this, fail, retry, do that, change their direction. So they're young. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this company, this small startup company, when it grows, it won't become an old company. It completely depends on how much flexible you are and your ability, like I said, to deal with uncertainty. So when it comes to people being afraid, it comes from this idea of uncertainty. Like we don't know anything. That's the one truth I would like accept in a way. We don't know anything. We don't know what's going to happen just 3 seconds from now, 1 second from now, tomorrow, whatever. We can just get ourselves prepared, plan, and like try to ideate. We can put our intentions of how things might progress, and we can know our values so that along the way we walk a certain walk. But when it comes to people trying to set these really rigid boundaries so that nothing goes wrong, so that nobody can blame me, first of all, we know that there is no trust in that situation. Second, people are afraid because if I do something wrong, I will be blamed. Whereas I need to be able to do something wrong. I need to have mistakes, because without mistakes I cannot discover what I don't know. You know, um, there are actually like 4 stages to learning, and this making mistake, the idea of making mistake is very crucial for these 4 stages to work, because the first stage is the unconscious incompetence, where we don't know what we don't know. And there's no way for us to be able to know unless we make a mistake, unless we're allowed to wander around the uncertainty that we're in and go into the dark rooms, go into the dark places where we need to discover what we haven't known so far. But once we start to see, it's still an incompetence, but this time a conscious one, conscious incompetence. With the conscious incompetence, now we're aware what we don't know. So in a company, when somebody makes a mistake, that person realizes what they don't know. That is the chance for that person to change their behavior to something that serves them, which is the step towards conscious competence. Now the people are choosing to become competent consciously And it takes energy because our brain is wired to do it the old way, the way which we didn't know. It's like driving a car. Like in the beginning, maybe you don't even know that you needed to drive a car, or maybe you don't even know that there was a car to drive. Then you realize, okay, I actually need to drive a car, but you still don't know how to drive a car. And once you start driving a car, you realize how much energy it takes from you because you need to check your mirrors, you need to check the gear, the steering wheel, the road, the traffic signs, everything, the people around you, other cars. There are a lot of stimuli that's coming around you that you need to be aware of and you need to put your energy towards. So going from conscious incompetence to conscious competence, you need to put a lot of energy to change, to adapt, and you need to be aware that you're choosing what is serving you every single time. But after a while, all of a sudden, without even thinking, you start driving the car. Without even thinking, you behave in a certain way that is serving you. That is unconscious competence. But that doesn't mean within these four stages that the experience is over. Because, like I said before, 2 years from now, this unconscious competence may not be serving you anymore, and you may need to change it. So, this becomes your unconscious incompetence, and you make a mistake again. So, there is no single time in a lifetime of a person where we shouldn't be making mistakes. And this involves the companies.
I think that we could actually have a whole session on that of what you just discussed, especially understanding what our goals or the outcomes are of that, of what we have in those processes that have been hardwired, and understanding what our triggers are. But we actually have a definition of purpose, and I'd like to go ahead and use that as a Kickstarter to make the transition into our conversation on purpose. Purpose for me is really to do things that go beyond our own being and what we personally need and want, and do these together with others, to find ways that help a whole community benefit and take them to a new level of well-being, mental, physical, etc., together. These obviously need endless amounts of tries, going back, Meir, to what you were talking about, iterations, ideation, and change, and we can go anywhere from here, basically. That was a mouthful. Thank you very much for that definition. I agree wholeheartedly. There are a couple things that I would like to add to that, but first, Meir, I'd like to give you the stage and get your opinion. Perhaps go ahead and share this again on the screen.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the togetherness aspect of it is really important because I may have a purpose for my own life, but we're social beings, and together we create something. So this approach of taking purpose in a positive way, so saying purpose is for our well-being, is, I think, how we may need to define purpose. Because normally purpose is a very neutral word. Like my purpose may be bad as well. It may be harmful as well. Though once we define purpose as something being positive for the well-being of our community, for our health, for our abundance, then I think it serves the community even more. Just the definition of it serves more. I think it's really important to approach it in that sense. And like I said, like togetherness is one of the most crucial parts. And in order to do that, I think the iteration part is very important because we don't know what we don't know until we experience it. We can imagine, we can ideate that this is going to work this way, But once we start trying, once we start experiencing it, it may bring out different opportunities, even. I'm not even talking about problems, different opportunities where we can take them and go towards a different direction and realize and redefine our purpose. I think
Maybe,
it's
first of all,
there are
before
different
we,
layers.
sorry, I stepped on your words, Mayor. That would like to make another request of all of you out there to provide your definition of purpose or purpose driven. And we are allowing you to actually go ahead and drive our conversation. So anything you can think along those lines, please feel free to utilize the chat box, put your comments into the chat box, and we will use that as an impetus to continue our conversation. But now I am going to play the devil's advocate for you, Mayor. I thought
Okay.
about this in preparation of the show. I thought about this definition of purpose, and piggybacking on the definition that was given already, obviously there has to be some sense of meaning that is tied into this definition of purpose. That sense of meaning could be as an individual, probably more of a collective, that we have a collective meaning of what we're trying to achieve, and that drives us to move forward. But of course, if we think that there is such a concept of too much of a good thing, then let's look at the flip side. Purpose is a funny word. We say that if somebody did something, perhaps maybe usually we refer to it as being something malicious. We will say they did it on purpose, which is actually very negative. In addition, if we look at purpose, our reason to be, that it's very often equated with the word drive. And drive, especially for those of us, and I'm including myself in that conversation, who are perhaps maybe borderline obsessive, if you're consumed with drive, then you think that more purpose is better, and you lose that equilibrium. So I want to go ahead and throw those thoughts in your direction, Mayor, and to be curious to see what your opinion is. And also, not just for him, but for all of you out there, if you disagree with anything I said, that would be fantastic. I'd love to hear about that. Please feel free to tell me. I'm full of whatever whatever that might be, fill in the blanks. But first of all, Mary, if I can give you back the stage, and I'd be keen on your opinion on to that of what I just mentioned.
Thank you. I think what was most impactful in what you said for me was they did it on purpose, the malicious act. And I don't think that anybody is acting not on purpose. We're all acting on purpose, but it's about becoming aware of our purpose. So nobody is doing something bad, but it's an action that they believe is in the best interest of themselves or their people. So it's about, in a way, when we feel it's malicious, it comes from separation. It comes from the idea that you and I are different, so that either it serves me or it serves you. As soon as I start thinking this way, that you and I are separated, we are different, different in a way, we're of course different, but different in a way, but we're separated. Like my best interest will never be aligned with your best interest, because we are not coming together. We are not part of the same. This understanding of separation makes people act maliciously, because when I'm thinking in terms of what I do needs to serve me and what serves me cannot serve you, then my purpose becomes malignant. Like I said, purpose is a neutral word. It can serve towards this malignation, but this
Hmm.
maliciousness, but
I,
it can
I would
also
even
serve
argue,
well-being.
sorry, stop you. I
Please.
would even argue that very often when we have certain results that we expect at the end. So there would be something we would do, and depending upon whatever we decided to do, we expect certain results. Those results might not necessarily always be positive. Why? Because you as an individual might feel that you do not deserve a positive outcome. So therefore you throw a monkey wrench into the plans because that is the outcome that you expect. It fulfills your impression of yourself and what you deserve to define how worthy you are. But I'd like to go ahead and make sure that we do not um, monopolize the airwaves here. I have a definition coming from Stella Wittmann. Thank you very much, Stella, for participating today. Purpose for me means taking care of the nature without harm of me or my products being there, meaning that we are in alignment with nature. And
Mhm.
obviously that would be, I'm going to interpret this a couple different ways, and I'll pass it over to you, Meir. That would be our individual purpose, and that would be our collective purpose. What are your thoughts?
I believe the key in this sentence is nature.
Hmm.
So, when you look at nature, the definition of nature, I think it's really important now. We ask people how they define nature, because as soon as we start talking about nature, I always catch people having this thin line between nature and people, separating us from the nature.
Hmm.
Like, so when you look at a bird's nest, you say it's nature because the bird built it. But when you look at a building, you say it's man made. It's not nature. We are not in nature because we're surrounded by buildings. The nature is where the trees are. The nature is where the soil is, where the grass is, you know, where the wild animals are. Though, like,
I,
how is it different than what we build gets separated from nature? I think this idea of separation brings the harm because what we do can either help sustain the natural cycle of birth and death or support one side more. If we support birth more, it's harmful. If we support death more, it's harmful. I think it's being in the balance and understanding of this.
this is typical of human nature, I would argue, because if you separate yourselves from the others, then that means you can say that you're better. And basically this is what we've been doing for a number of years. We believe, and especially this is very cultural, and I am originally from a country that is probably the worst offender, if I may say so, of believing that we can control nature. And of course, that concept of nature takes on different forms. But let's stay with the one that you were mentioning, where that we can control the way that rivers flow. We can control how the habitat is actually managed. We stand over nature and we hold the power to make that happen. And of course, if there's anything that we should have learned over the last few years at least, is that is completely bunk. That is not true. And in fact, the sooner that we realize that we are part of nature and we play a very important role in getting to that steady state that you referred to, the better off we're going to be. Here's another comment that came through. Being aligned with nature is the baseline for me, as we are one with nature, really. Of course, it's not a purpose. Staying aligned to nature while we do things can be part of the well-being and purpose. I have nothing
Wow.
of value to add to that perfect statement.
Definitely. It's
And I
wow.
thank the
Staying
user who
aligned.
went ahead and contributed with that. Thank you very much for your comments.
Yeah,
How
thank
does this
you.
look
This
when we're looking at organizations? Because very often in that of what I've been pursuing uh, is getting back to the man main, looking at how we establish a purpose driven organization. How do you feel that all of these parts come together in trying to achieve that type of creation?
I think the purpose driven, when we talk about purpose driven organization, we also need to, because like this sentence that this LinkedIn user gave, I don't know the name of him or her, um, but like at the
A
end,
very
the
astute
staying
person,
aligned.
regardless.
Yeah, yeah, it's all right. Staying aligned to nature while we do our things, being aligned to nature in a purposeful organization also means losing all the hierarchy. You know, we are defining nature in terms of hierarchy, of course, like who eats who and what kills what. And we think of this as a hierarchy. We don't look at it as a balance, as something that is equally important. So we put things above each other in order to categorize. And this exception, like this separation, not exception, this separation idea we put into companies and organizations is how we get misaligned from nature. So somebody organizing things, coordinating things is not more important than somebody doing things. And once we look at it this way, like in my play shops, there is this activity that I get people to do in a circle. I get people to go in the center saying, "This is my place," no matter who they are. Like if they're a manager, an executive, an intern, whatever, it doesn't matter. This is my place. Everybody has the right to take the floor, become the leader of their field, and lead that equally. So horizontal leadership. And within this horizontal leadership, if we enable ourselves to be transparent and get input from others to collaborate, it becomes collaborative horizontal leadership. So that the purpose driven organization, first of all, needs to organize itself in a nature aligned way. So it doesn't come from just the words that we put towards our purpose, but it's the way we apply them.
I would agree wholeheartedly, meaning that we would have certain conditions for these things to work properly. So, apart from, I'm reading into your words, so if I got something wrong, I feel
Please.
confident that you will correct me. That each individual is treated with respect, and that each individual can contribute. For me, that would be a condition that needs to be fulfilled for us to achieve that purpose driven organization. What other conditions do you believe that we have to make sure are fulfilled for us to reach that state?
Um, okay, this collectivity is important. Like people coming together and thinking together, collaborating. You and I, we're listening to each other. These are all good. But before that, what comes is the individual. Am I aligned within myself? Am I connected to myself? Am I able to articulate how I feel? Am I able to face my emotions, my fears? Am I able to share this with people, lean on people, trust people? Am I able to trust myself first that whatever happens, I will be good, well, healthy, because I am taking care of myself? Am I able to say this to myself? Because if not every single individual in a community can say this, then the community doesn't work. That this doesn't mean that everybody needs to be perfect. Like, I can have really shitty days, really bad days that I feel awful. Like, I don't want to get out of bed. This is also possible. But am I able to share this with people open-heartedly, transparently? And is it accepted in the community? Now comes the social part. Because when you think, because like, okay, we're talking about two concepts here. One is purpose and one is play, right? So the play is mostly related with learning. It is the activity of learning in a joyful manner, in a simultaneously acted manner. And this acting actually brings three things, three different types of learnings. One is the inner learning. Second is the behavioral learning. And third is the social learning. And it needs to bring this from our perception, from the person who is playing, these learnings in this order. First, it needs to bring the inner learning. Because without the inner learning, without me understanding myself first, I cannot change my behavior or decide on the behavior that is going to serve me, because I don't know me. If I don't know me, how can I know what is going to serve me? And with this behavior, now I can understand the social learning, how the society, how the community, how the people around me is reacting and dynamically interacting. So the first stage to any purpose-driven organization is for individuals to start working on themselves, understanding themselves. I'm not saying this is a magical thing that happens overnight. It's a continuous work, but being aware that you are in the process of understanding yourself, learning yourself, having inner learnings, improves the play in a purposeful way. This coming together of these people will bring such collective wisdom that everybody will have the space to listen to each other openly, knowing that I am experiencing the same thing.
I have a number of things to comment to what you just mentioned. The first one would be that this is in the best case maybe linear, but I think we really seldom have the best case, meaning that we don't automatically progress from one to the other. That very possibly we do not. I'm just kind of hypothesizing that we might understand the social components, and we see that more of a sense of duty, but we might not necessarily look at that as being a driver for us personally. And in fact, we do to a number of reasons, and very possibly culturally, that we have learned to repress the personal or the individual for the profit of the group, and that is the way that things are done. And so when we look at transformation, we claim that we're moving in this direction, and because we have group consensus, whatever that may be. It's probably not really consensus, something that has been dictated, but we look at that as being in the best interest of the group. We follow it. Whereas that first point that you mentioned is never really pursued. So that would be point number one. Point number two, we are looking at a transformation, and we know that transformations are never linear. They're clearly not revolutionary. If anything, in the best case, they are evolutionary. They're not revolutionary. And very often, and I'm just looking from a personal perspective, very often I have the feeling I'll make one step forward and maybe two or maybe even more steps backwards. And that is the way that I make progress. And unfortunately, we get frustrated because we feel that we're not making any progress. We are making progress, but we just don't see it. And then, of course, there is this idea, going back to what I talked about earlier, that in those outcomes that we expect, we don't look at ourselves as being worthy. So we more or less sabotage the results so that it fits this picture we have of ourselves. And of course, within a group dynamics, that we all we need is one person to want to sabotage the whole endeavor based upon what they feel they are worthy of. And of course, that has a tremendous effect on the entire organization. So I believe that all of this is a lot more complex than following 3 steps. I'd like to make an appeal to our audience. Any comments that you might have based upon something that Meir has said, or maybe something that I've said, please feel free to be part of this conversation. Interesting. We talked about this prior to going live, and as I mentioned, that we're always looking at dynamics that are always tied to a conversation between 2 or more individuals. I didn't even think about following this conversation and that of what I just mentioned. Very, very insightful, but it shows the complexity of what we're really dealing with in trying to put something that's purposeful. And I'd like to ask you a question tied to this and the use of play. And maybe that we use play to get rid of the inhibition so that we can get closer to the truth. What are your thoughts on that?
In a sense, for me, the inhibition itself is part of the play. Like boredom is part of the play. See, when you are playing, a lot of emotions rise. Just think of you playing a game, for example, a computer game, let's say. Sometimes you get angry. Sometimes you get jealous. You have all these emotions, and all these emotions, you can look at them from a perspective of inhibition, a problem, something to avoid. Though everything is telling you something, I think it's important to listen. That inhibition you're having is part of the play, and play is not to overcome that inhibition, but to face it. So you need to sit with it sometimes. So play doesn't always look like people jumping around. Sometimes it's people just sitting silently. That's also play. When you talk with children, sometimes, like, you can tell the children, okay, let's play. We are going to stand on one of our feet without talking for 5 minutes until this alarm clock goes. And you stand there with just 1 feet, And the child also stands there on just 1 feet. Like, tries this, like trying to keep the balance, sometimes giggles, but knows that she shouldn't be giggling, so holds her mouth and everything. But it is part of play, It can be hard to do something, but it is part of play. And for the complexities of our learning process and everything, and then the purposeful approach and the play being involved, I would like to add one more thing that just came to my mind right now. We're talking a lot about innovation. And innovation for me means the application of virginal thinking. Though we are not talking enough about tradition, which sits in the balancing side of innovation. One is not good or bad. It is just that what we can bring from our past as an experience that we want to preserve is also as important as what we need to change. What we are in peace with, what we feel comfortable, not just because it is comfortable, but because it's valuable. What we feel content with. These are also the things that we need to talk about when we're talking about purposeful play.
Hmm. There's
Because
another. I'm sorry.
because when we are playing, like there are certain rules that we don't like to leave because they add value to us. Please, I would love to hear what you
Yeah,
have.
sure. I think part of that, when you mentioned games, there are a couple of thoughts that went through my mind, specifically the idea of putting together safe spaces where you can try things and nothing can go bad. And that's one of the
Mhm.
reasons why games are, I believe, are so important and so popular. It allows for people to actually experiment without fear of repercussion. Now, there's a concept that we have within this within games, and perhaps you might have heard of this one already. It's called the magic circle. And within the magic circle, you define a certain area where nothing can go wrong because you have entered the magic circle. That means you've entered a new dimension, which enables you to do things that you were not able to do otherwise, almost like superhuman powers. On the one
Mhm.
hand, that you have the shield over yourself, which means that nothing bad can happen to you because you are in the magic circle. And as soon as you've exit the game, then you exit the magic circle. And but those thoughts and those experiences that you had within the magic circle, they stay with you. And that is the power of this concept of games. Now, I don't know if you were thinking along those lines of that safe space and that of what you were talking about. But I'd be keen on your opinion. But we have some more feedback coming from the audience. I'd like to go ahead and
Hey,
share that first. Um, why is preserving tradition so difficult?
wow,
Yeah,
amazing
great
question.
question, huh? Hmm?
Yeah, because preserving tradition so difficult. I don't know if it is difficult, though. In order to preserve something, you need to understand it. You need to take your time with it. You need to like really listen to it. You cannot just take shortcuts with it. You need to understand it deeply, immerse yourself into it. You know, you need to spend time to experience it fully and understand it. As soon as you start your assumptions, as soon as you start your judgments, you are not there anymore. And because of this quick society, this everything needs to be fast. It really becomes difficult to preserve tradition because we cannot understand tradition. And I don't know if I am understanding tradition fully. I
Hmm.
just like it just came to me. I didn't say it because I am doing it perfectly. It just said like, wow, I am not even doing that. I am not even
Hmm.
talking about tradition. Like if you read my content on design playing, I don't know if I have ever talked about tradition before. Like this is
Hmm.
something that came to my mind now. I am not
Hmm.
saying I have been doing it perfectly or good. You
Here's
know?
some spontaneous thoughts from my end. First off, we have traditions. We do things, but we don't know why, and we are told this is the way we do things. And if anybody was to ask you why you're doing it that way, and you would not really think about it, but you were told that you are supposed to do it this way, and so that's why you
Mm,
do it. That means the tradition as such doesn't have the meaning that it should have, in understanding that we're taking this collective, and this is my take, you're taking this collective knowledge throughout the years, and you are almost like the custodian of that, of what has happened so many generations prior. But unfortunately, if you do not recognize those elders that were before you, understand why they followed this path and why it's important to uphold this tradition, then it has no value. So that would be step number one. The second one is that we feel that traditions are old-fashioned and we don't need them. Especially, again, I'm speaking from a culture that I grew up in, where we believe that progress is throwing away things that have no value. Well, if you're not able to see the value in those things that you're doing, then you shouldn't be surprised if you are not able to not only toss over something that really does have value, and here I'm closing the loop with nature, by the way, something that really does have value, we throw it overboard because we're not capable of actually recognize the value. But that there's a flip side to that one too. So how do we know from this transformation that we have planned that we are actually creating value if we do not actually have the ability to recognize value? Then that is not going to change whether we're looking into the past or looking into the future. And the third part that immediately comes to mind when we're looking at traditions is something that we have in common. And if we're not able to recognize those things that we have in common, then how are we ever going to reach that level that we talked about in coming up with a defined level, defined purpose? It's not possible. And so this is an excellent question, and it's a serious problem. And the sooner we're actually able to go ahead and address it from those perspectives that I just listed, and probably a number of others, that's just a 5-minute analysis from my end. The sooner we can actually do that, the better off we are. I'll put it on pause.
Actually, it's like really interesting, because the way we look at tradition, we can actually tie this to organizations and companies.
Completely.
Imagine this, because people didn't have enough internet bandwidth, YouTube might have, kept the 360p videos. And that decision may become a tradition. And under the name of tradition, it may lose its understanding. And they might have never changed it. Even our internet bandwidth is really high now. So that they would keep the 360p versions of video, and we would still be watching those videos, online. Why? Because it's tradition. So keeping tradition just for the sake of tradition is actually hindering the companies. And I think that's why it's being afraid. Like, not it is being afraid, but it's being feared that much. Tradition is something that is hindering us, that's inhibiting us, that's keeping us old. But it's not tradition. It's the lack of understanding of tradition. It's the lack of keeping record of the meaning of every decision. Once there's a decision, we cannot just forget it. We need to remind ourselves of that decision and why we made that decision, so that when time comes, we can change it. I think we need to find approaches where we can do this in an optimized way, in an efficient way, so that we don't need to think of the old every single day. But when we need to remind ourselves of that tradition, the value is there, it's recorded, so that if we don't need that value anymore, we can change it. Then comes innovation.
That goes back, Meir, to something you mentioned earlier, and that was tied to, I'm going to call them habits, things that we do not realize. And you talked about these points explicitly in your concepts. So we do things we don't know why, and that means the results by performing these actions, they may or may not fit what we're looking for, but because we're hard coded to, or hardwired, better said, to perform these actions. There's a trigger that happens. We go into our routine and we expect whatever the reward it should be, which may or may not be the real reward we're looking for. But this all ties into this question of tradition. We do things because we've been told we should do them this way. And unfortunately, we make a correlation between the value to be found between these traditions and the ability to actually see value, and to use this maybe even as an excuse why we don't want to change. There's another comment I'd like to go ahead and highlight here, coming from another LinkedIn user. Again, thank you very much for your comments. I'd add that as communities, we need structures, though, on top of the play element. And I think I already know what you're going to say here, but I'm going to give you the stage, of course. It is a compromise for everyone, but it is a necessary part of the play. Meir, your thoughts on this?
Okay, I got really curious why it is a compromise, and what does it mean to put structures on top of the play element? I got really curious about this because I think it needs some kind of that explanation. When I look at play, it is already there. It's not something that we can remove. It's just something that we can become aware of. So whatever we do, it is already on top of play. So it is not on top, but actually part of play. Like everything is part of play. It's just that us becoming aware of it. And when we talk about communities, I think the hardest part about communities to grasp is a community does not belong to anyone, and it belongs to everyone. So you cannot control a community. You cannot direct a community. It doesn't have a hierarchical point which says, okay, do this, do that. The community decides on its own. And I think the new technologies are allowing us to realize that again, to remember that again. There are certain people in the community which are responsible of holding space for people for certain times, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are, above others. They can be called leaders, though them leading is not by putting themselves above or taking the power for themselves just for the sake of power, but to spread it through them. So within a community, when you look at it, and when you look at it through the perspective of play, what we realize is everybody is a leader. Everybody is a leader in their own domain. And the definition of that domain depends on you. And in order for you to make that definition of that domain, you need to research yourself, understand yourself, what you like, what your passion is, what you enjoy, what you love to be a part of, what you love to try. And these things can change at any moment in time. So you don't need to be fixed to just one thing.
3 points from my end. Again, Meir, thank you very much for that. First of all, I would say a leader is a servant to others. That is a true leader. Allowing for others to reach their potential is a sign of leadership, where it's not ego-based, but rather it's based on giving, knowing full well that by being able to enable others, that you are showing leadership ability. So that would be the first one. The second one, I've heard, and I don't remember if it was in this conversation or perhaps in previous conversations that we had, you were talking about rules-based, and perhaps that might be the structures that this individual is referring to. If we don't have ground rules for, say, for example, how we interact with each other, looking at a playful environment, then things can go wrong. And so perhaps that might be part of the structure element. And I would definitely agree with that. I have an objection to the word compromise, because compromise for me means nobody wins, everybody loses. I would change the word compromise to consensus. Consensus is something completely different. Consensus means that we took the time to take everybody's needs into consideration, that we understand that we do need to make trade-offs in life. You don't get everything that you want, but you have to decide what's important. And at the end, nobody felt that there are winners and losers. But when I hear the word compromise, I'm thinking that, well, actually, I didn't want this, but this was the best I could do. Not very positive. That's my personal take. I'm afraid that we need to be closing up this conversation, I'm afraid, Meir. And so I would like to give you an opportunity to maybe give some closing words, and then we'll call it a wrap.
I just realized one more thing, and I would like to add that.
Sure.
When we are talking about leadership, the leader, we mostly assume that what is being led is people. Though I realize it's not all the time the people that we're leading. Sometimes it's the field that we are working on is what we are leading. Like we are pioneers researching at the edge of what we are doing. So we are trying things like an artist just for the sake of trying sometimes. And we are discovering things. And we are leading in that field. It's not to get people to follow us. If they like, they can. If they want, they can. I've already shed some light in this dark corner of the room, so you can walk in. But my purpose of shedding the light was not specifically for you to walk in. It was for me to see. So I think this understanding of being a leader just to shed some light for the sake of curiosity is very valuable, because once we start assuming that I am leading people, it becomes like a hierarchy. You know, I am not leading people. I'm just leading what I do. I'm just curious to see what is beyond. And when I see, I share. And if people follow, they follow. And if they want to look elsewhere while following, I can follow them too. They would be leading their corner. And there are countless corners in this room that needs to be shed light.
Man, I love that. That means that we're not talking about dualism. Either you're a leader or you're not a leader. We're saying that everybody is a leader. In your definition, this picture came up my mind, looking forward, leading. We are moving the edges. I love that. And it reminded me of the thoughts that have been going through my head, and I guess this is my closing, that life is a collection of experiments, and then we run out of time. and really, that's what it comes down to. So speaking of running out of time, I guess that's the best segue I could think of. Meir, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate all the comments that came from all of you out there. I hope that you were able to find some added value in this conversation. And I look forward to the next opportunity that we have in Meir. And I know that for a fact, you and I, are going to continue this conversation. That one's guaranteed. Yes. So again, Thank you very much, all. Thanks, Meir, for joining. And I look forward to our next opportunity. Take care, all.
Thank you.